begin it, Femi, at the home of the reigning, defending, two-time Super Bowl champion, Kansas City Chiefs, as they said, get set to host Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens. Amazing season opener coming up on Thursday night. We'll be in Vegas for it. Can't wait. Femi, where do we stand right now, side and total season opener, Chiefs and Ravens?
Yeah, an absolutely banger of a game. You have the reigning MVP from the regular season and the reigning Super Bowl MVP as well, with Patrick Mahomes versus Lamar Jackson. Rematch of last year's AFC title game that just felt massive when watching that game, and KC being able to prevail and hold on for that one. But in terms of the betting market, might be actually one of the more boring games that we have here for week one, because we've been hanging out here with Kansas City laying 3 in the total of 46 since about July. The total was the last thing to move with this game. These two teams, we've seen them play year in, year out. I think everybody's pretty comfortable with where they have them rated. It's the same head coaches, John Harbaugh, Andy Reid. It's the same quarterbacks, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes. The defenses, there's been a little bit of change for Baltimore in terms of how they're going to be coordinated. Personnel changes, of course, the regular turnover that you get from one season to the next in the National Football League. But by and large, these two teams pretty similar, and I think everybody just sort of agrees with how they have them rated. In a game where it's Ravens at the Chiefs at Arrowhead Stadium, Kansas City should be favored by about a field goal, and that's where we sit right now. So not a whole lot to report with that game. Other games, we've seen the board light up as early as about 5 minutes ago, but for this game in particular, we've been pretty static since about the month of July.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that we see at some point in between now and Thursday, let's get that 2.5 back on Kansas City, because I'll tell you what, you can't go 17-0 without first going 1-0 for my Kansas City Chiefs this season. More about that game obviously coming up over the course of the week, and full Power Hour Thursday, including thy Royal Prop King for the Chiefs and the Ravens. Femi, let's go. I is actually a bad job by me. I should have looked up, how do you say Friday in Portuguese for the game in Brazil coming up on Friday with the Eagles and the Packers, where apparently there's players can't leave their hotels, the Twitter isn't allowed. How are we going to get live injury updates on this game when Twitter is literally, your X is not allowed in Brazil. X gonna give it to you. Well, not in Brazil. No X in Brazil. So no Twitter updates from the media there. This is going to be interesting, right? Coming up at Corinthians Stadium with the Eagles and the Packers Friday night in Brazil. Femi, where do we stand on this game? The Eagles and the Packers, two of the better teams coming up in the NFC.
So this is one of those games that's been really interesting, not just with the matchup, because it's Jordan Love and this Packers team that many people think might go ahead and ascend to contending status in 2024 versus the Eagles, who are looking to bounce back after their disaster of a second half a season ago. But this is an interesting betting market, because right now we sit here 2.5, but about 30 minutes ago, I was doing Femi's Focus, and we focused on these primetime Week 1 NFL games, and there were a couple threes out there in the market. And then
Femi's Focus, not to interrupt, but Femi's Focus then became someone else talk so I can try and bet a Packers +3 here. That was Femi's Focus then on the show last hour.
I'm not saying that we moved the market, but what I am saying is we did the segment 5 minutes later. The couple threes that were there in the market no longer exist, as we are back to 2.5. And we were talking about this during the break before we got into this segment here. At +3, Green Bay has to be the bet. I made the case for the Packers about 20 minutes ago about how they're evenly matched teams with the Philadelphia Eagles, and on a neutral site, I would like Green Bay. And I think 48.5 being the total, I mean, I can see the case to where somebody might want to go over, but in these sort of, I guess, unconventional or just abnormal situations and environments, the game is being played in freaking Brazil. Like that, I just would not want to bet an over when the situation is not really normal for either team. So to me, it would be the dog or pass in this situation. Now that the 3 is gone, it's probably just pass. If you want to put it in a teaser, but even then, I think this is just too volatile of a situation to even put that in a teaser and have to pay the price for that. So 2.5, 48.5 being the total, but the Philadelphia Eagles are favored. Rightfully so. They should be a slight favorite, but a field goal is just a little bit too much respect for Fly Eagles Fly. So the people that gobbled up those +3s with Green Bay, good job. You did well. But as it stands right now, nothing for me in this game. But that's the movement, as it's been interesting, at least throughout this day.
Obviously, a bad final couple seasons of the TV show Lost, but still one of my favorite TV shows of all time. And I talk about this sometimes, right? Man of science versus man of faith, and applying that to sports betting. If you're going to bet this game, the Eagles could obviously win this game by a lot. We've seen them. They were 10-1 last year to start the year, and then a terrible end to the season. Whereas I think we know what the Packers are going to be this year. We think they're going to be pretty good. Almost like Green Bay, man of science. Eagles, you want them to win this game by margin, potentially? That feels a little man of faith-ish. Not that it can happen. I think I'd probably be more in line with Femi to take the 3 with Green Bay if it popped again coming up on Friday night in Brazil. You Better You Bet with Nick, Femi, Kostos and the Gamblers and company here on this terrific Football Tuesday as we kick off NFL season with it moved for week 1 in the National Football League. All right, we now move, Femi, to Sunday at 1 o'clock Eastern to the Florida Bowl with the Miami Dolphins and the Jacksonville Jaguars. I can't wait for this game. This game will make my quick picks segment coming up, like one of my games coming up to start next hour. What's happening with Miami and Jacksonville in South Florida?
You're getting movement for both side and total, which makes this game really interesting to talk about. And I'll start with the total because this is one that we discussed last week with Whale Drew Dinsick, and he liked the over. Both of us talked about it during the break. We kind of leaned towards the over, but under money actually showed up this afternoon to where there was some 50s yesterday, 49.5s. Now I'm seeing 49. There's one 49.5 here in Las Vegas, but I'm seeing mainly 49s, and there's even a 48.5. So interest came in on the under, which I find to be really interesting given the fact that we saw both of these quarterbacks play in the preseason. Both guys are healthy. The Dolphins' offensive line, it's never going to be good, but they're able to scheme around that. And maybe this is sort of respect for Jacksonville's defense, a defense that I'm higher on than probably the market is. And Ryan Nielsen, what he was able to do with the Falcons last year, now has a little bit more talent, especially on that defensive line in Jacksonville. Maybe that's where this is heading towards the under, that people are respecting what Jackson will be on the defensive side of the ball. But in terms of the side, we saw threes. Juice threes, about 3 minus 120 from Miami, but now we're starting to see some weak 3.5s. 3.5 even money if you want to bet the Miami Dolphins. There's still 3 minus 110 out there at a particular sportsbook here in Las Vegas. But outside of that, it's a lot of it expensive 3.5s if you want to back Jacksonville, cheap 3.5s if you want to back the Miami Dolphins, as those 3 minus 120s are pretty much all gone off the board with interest coming in on Miami about an hour ago.
I have a strong betting take on this game. We'll give it out to start next hour with quick picks. What I can tell you, my mortal lock, a team from Florida will win this game. There's no question about it. Femi, we can now officially move. We can now officially move for the first time this season to Atlanta. Let's not belabor the point, some very interesting side movement today with the Falcons and the Steelers.
100%. I was talking about this with our producer, our resident Steelers fan, Alex Fasano. The Steelers are now catching 3.5 at a couple spots, at one domestic, at one sportsbook here in Las Vegas. The consensus is still 3 minus 120 if you want to back the Atlanta Falcons. The total's hung out at 42 for a lot of the time here, but the side, I think, is what really is interesting, is money continues to show up on the Atlanta Falcons, and you read the news, you hear the stories about the Pittsburgh Steelers, and you kind of understand as to why. I know Isaac Seumalo, their guard, is not going to play in this game. That's not what's going to make this move. I think it's just more so pessimism of what we saw from the quarterback position throughout the preseason for the Pittsburgh Steelers. It started with a training camp with Russell Wilson being banged up, Justin Fields taking the majority of the snaps with the ones for Pittsburgh. And then we saw Justin Fields in the preseason, and it looked a lot like what we saw with the Chicago Bears. And then we saw Russell Wilson in the preseason, and it looked a lot like what it looked like for the Denver Broncos, who I think now the market is being very pessimistic for this Pittsburgh Steelers offense, which I think it's a little fascinating given the fact that we've yet to see Kirk Cousins play since he tore his Achilles near Halloween last season. But the market is going hard against the Pittsburgh Steelers as we now sit here at 3.5 at a couple spots. And it appears that's probably where we're going to end up at least some point across the board during this week leading up to Sunday's kickoff.
I can only pray that we can get a 3.5 with the 3.5 with the Pittsburgh Steelers on the road in Atlanta coming up this Sunday. Perhaps this game will make quick picks for me as well next hour here on the show. Femi, let's try and get at least one more game in here, and let's go to my terrible team, the hideous and pathetic New York Football Giants, who host slinging Sammy Darnold and the Minnesota Vikings. And Femi find themselves as home underdogs in Week 1 to Sam Darnold. Oh, how the mighty have fallen.
The mighty have fallen for Big Blue. And this was kind of hovering around pick earlier this summer. Got out to 1, but as of a couple days ago, we've now moved to Minnesota 1.5 at home. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to look at that and say, hey, maybe I want to tease the Giants up to 7.5 as a home dog. I don't necessarily think that would be one of those people. If you just like the Giants, just bet them to win the game, I feel like is an option because you're going against Sam Darnold. But I'm high on Minnesota. Maybe the market's a little bit higher on Minnesota than they are Big Blue in this spot. The total's been pretty much hovering around 41 here. But for the side, going from 1 to 1.5, not the biggest of moves, obviously, since those numbers are pretty close together. And how often do games actually land on 1? Not to say that it can't happen, but how often does it actually happen? But yeah, a little bit of interest coming in here on the Minnesota Vikings. Well, I guess we'll be tracking all throughout the week if that interest continues, and maybe we go up to 2 or 2.5.